Basic training follows a long historical pattern. Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and I gotta tell you, I get a fair number of comments that run along the line of, the Army training is just watered down, or military training doesn't adequately prepare leaders. In fact, there are some even more incendiary comments that YouTube just blocks automatically. But here's the thing. Whatever you are seeing with the current military, it's not new. It's a cycle that's been going on for the last 100 years. In fact, one of the places that this is most visible is in how basic combat training is delivered. A couple of years ago, the Army Heritage and Education Center published a paper called Learning the Lessons of Lethality, the Army's cycle of basic combat training, where they dug into the training plans from 1918 up to 2019. The fundamental takeaway is that there is an oscillation between peacetime and wartime training content, and that underlying pattern didn't seem to change even though there were major technological advances. The authors focused on the amount of time dedicated to different categories of initial entry training. And while the categories themselves tended to remain unchanged through time, there was an increased focus and more time spent on lethality and survivability during wartime. But once a conflict ended, there was a rapid shift back to what they called garrison-like activities. The chilling observation, and frankly, the reason that this matters for your individual military career, is that shift towards lethality and combat effectiveness, it tended to happen after the nation had already gotten into combat and had started to experience combat casualties. Probably one of the best visualizations of this pattern comes from this table, where the height of the bar represents the total length of basic training. You can see that in 1941 and 1943, as much as 50% of the training was devoted to lethality in orange and collective training at the bottom of the bar. But by 1949, collective training was removed entirely and lethality was down to 23%, even as the length of basic training was being reduced. Something similar happened in 1973 after the end of the Vietnam War. Basic training was cut to only 337 hours, and only a third of that was associated with lethality. By 2007, 2010, you can see the length of training along with the lethality and collective training going up again for obvious reasons. Now, for each period, the authors provide a table breaking down the types of activities that were included in each training category and the number of hours compared against the previous period. So, for instance, in the transition to post-World War II training, you can see an increase in drill and ceremonies from 24 hours to 53, while basic rifle marksmanship was cut from 164 hours down to 80. You may also notice that huge chunk of time, 166 hours, devoted to what the authors called other garrison training. Now, that is a pretty big junk drawer to just be labeled as other, but what the authors are referring to are the training sessions intended to introduce a soldier to the Army's values and culture. The exact naming of this content has changed dramatically over the years, but it usually includes learning military ranks, customs and courtesies, military justice, the organization of the Army, and its history. Essentially, the PowerPoint lecture portion of training. And more recently, this category has included, personal finances, SHARP, equal opportunity, and the Army's suicide prevention program. But so what? I mean, aside from fueling the grumpy old retirees feeling that the Army just ain't like it was when I was in, what does this mean for the career of a modern soldier? Well, number one, for A soldier who joins during peacetime, you can anticipate that your basic combat training is going to be heavy on spit shine and memorization and kind of light on combatives. You can anticipate that your first sergeant is going to be kind of irritated with the types of skills you haven't learned yet when you show up to your initial duty station. But more importantly, understand that this is a very dangerous trap for you to be in. If you stay in the military for any length of time, I can guarantee you that the tides of war will shift. You will need to be lethal, and you will need to be proficient at collective tasks. If you let your initial military training lull you into the belief that that's not true, you may find yourself unprepared in an incredibly dangerous location. Secondly, if you're a more senior leader and you're watching these fresh-faced recruits show up from basic training, don't be surprised if their mindset isn't quite yet fixed on the importance of lethality. Regrettably, that is how this system works, and we're all counting on you to sigh deeply to yourself, pick up your coffee cup, and then get them out in the field where they can learn the skills that are going to bring them home safely one day. Now, I'm a bureaucrat, so I'll tell you a little secret about why all this is happening. Money. Tough, realistic training is expensive. They're very expensive, especially when you start integrating live ammunition for live fire exercises. Drill and ceremony and lectures about PX privileges, those are cheap. Nobody is willing to pay for an expensive military until the balloon goes up and soldiers start dying. You can wish that this weren't true, you can gripe that it shouldn't be true, but if you don't do everything that you can within the constrained resources that you have, then you're just contributing to the next tragedy. And if you want to see how this ebb and flow of resources and military operations has affected soldiers for generations, watch this video.